M16. The United States military has spent over 60 years and billions of dollars trying to replace one rifle. 6 major programs, dozens of competing designs, and the M16 is still here. Most failed programs get canceled because the weapon didn't work. The M16's challengers kept getting canceled despite the fact that some of them worked better. The XM8 beat the M4 in dust testing by a factor of 7. It got canceled anyway. The G11 was so advanced, NATO nations budgeted billions for it. It got canceled anyway. The Army ran 8 companies through a full competition and found 0 winners. And it still died for reasons unrelated to performance. 6 programs, 60 years, since before today's soldiers were born. What that survival actually cost is the real story. The pattern that explains every cancellation. Each challenger had to be better than the M4 and better than the entire ecosystem built around it. That second requirement is what killed them. It starts in Vietnam, 1964. The Army fields Colt's new rifle, the M16, based on Eugene Stoner's Armalite design. Lightweight, innovative, 5.56mm. The Pentagon pushes it straight into the jungle without fully solving a problem they already knew existed. In 1968, a Marine wrote home about what he found after a firefight. Practically every one of their dead was found with his rifle torn down next to him, trying to fix it during a gunfight. That image, a dead Marine with a disassembled rifle beside him, is the starting point for everything that followed. Because the Army knew before deployment that the rifle had serious problems, they shipped it anyway. That decision doesn't just explain Vietnam, it explains the next 60 years. The rifle was originally designed for a specific propellant, IMR 4475, stick powder. But sometime between the decision to adopt and actual fielding, the Army switched to a different powder, WC 846 ball powder. The switch was made partly for cost and partly for compatibility with other ammunition. It was not made because of what it would do to the rifle. Ball powder burned dirtier. It increased the cyclic rate from around 750 rounds per minute to over 900. That faster cycling gave the bolt less time to extract spent cases before the next round started feeding. Under the jungle humidity of Vietnam, where chambers rusted overnight, stuck cases became a death sentence. Extraction failures, bolt bounce, carbon fouling so severe the direct impingement system, which routes propellant gas directly into the receiver, turned the bolt carrier group into a carbon trap after a few hundred rounds. Here's the key point. The rifle didn't fail randomly, it failed predictably. And there was a second failure, completely separate, compounding the first. And then there was the chrome lining decision. The Army had classified it as too expensive, so soldiers in Vietnam's 90% humidity carried rifles with bare steel chambers that corroded within days of field use. No cleaning kits were issued. The rifle was sold to troops as practically self-cleaning. The I-Cord subcommittee investigated in 1967. Their conclusion was damning. The powder switch had not been justified or supported by test data. In the subcommittee's words, the decision to omit chrome lining bordered on criminal negligence. The Army knew the rifle had problems before deploying it and shipped it anyway. The fix, chrome-lined chambers, heavier buffer to slow the cyclic rate, cleaning kits, forward assist, produced the M16A1 in 1967. It worked, but the cost of that lesson was paid in ambush sites across Quang Nam province. This was the pattern that would repeat for the next 60 years. The Army recognizes a problem. The Army does not solve it cleanly. The fix creates the next problem, and somewhere in that cycle, a replacement program gets launched and eventually canceled for reasons that had nothing to do with whether the new weapon actually worked. The first attempt started before Vietnam even ended. In fact, it started before the M16 existed at all. SPIW, Special Purpose Individual Weapon. The program launched in 1951, years before the M16 existed. The concept? Replace conventional ammunition entirely with flechettes, steel darts, 10 grains each, fired in bursts at 2,300 to 2,400 rounds per minute. The theory was that at those velocities, even near misses would fragment and wound. Volume of fire would compensate for individual projectile lethality. In practice, the program ran into problems it never solved. Cook-off, rounds firing from heat rather than trigger pull, was a persistent issue at those cyclic rates. Reliability in field conditions was marginal, and lethality testing revealed the fundamental weakness of the concept. A flechette at medium range, under combat conditions, was less lethal than a conventional 5.56 round. The terminal ballistics didn't hold up the way the math predicted. The Army tested multiple designs through the 1950s and 60s and found none that met requirements. By 1974, 23 years after the program started, SPIW was formally abandoned without producing a fielded weapon. What it did produce was the M203 grenade launcher. The underbarrel 40mm grenade system that still mounts under M4 rifles today came directly from SPIW research. 23 years, hundreds of millions of dollars. One attachment that could have been developed without the rifle program at all. That was the return on investment for the first attempt to replace the M16's predecessor before it even existed. The Army kept using the M16 through the 1970s and into the 80s. The M16A2 arrived in the early 80s, heavier and more accurate, designed around the 62-grain M855 NATO round. 3-round burst replaced full auto. 1 in 7 twist rate stabilized the heavier projectile. Better furniture, adjustable sights, a genuine improvement over the A1. But while the Army was refining the M16, a parallel program was working on something far more radical. ACR, Advanced Combat Rifle. 1986 to 1990. The requirement? Achieve a 100% improvement in hit probability compared to the M16A2 under combat conditions, double the hit rate. That was the baseline the Army set. 4 companies competed. Heckler & Koch entered the G11, chambered in 4.73 by 33mm caseless ammunition. No brass case. The propellant block and bullet were bonded together as a single unit. No ejection, no extraction. Just combustion and the next round rotating into battery from a horizontally fed magazine above the barrel. The G11's 3-round burst fired at 2,000 rounds per minute, so fast the rifle barely moved before all 3 rounds left the barrel. Traditional burst fire disperses shots as recoil builds between rounds. At 2,000 RPM, the group left the muzzle before the shooter's body had time to react. The engineering was extraordinary. NATO certified the G11's performance in April 1990. The Bundeswehr had budgeted 2.7 billion Deutschmarks to buy 300,000 of them. 3 other designs competed: a Steyr bullpup, a Colt duplex round system, and AAI's flechette follow-up to SPIW. None of them hit the 100% improvement threshold. Every design showed improvement over the M16. None doubled the hit rate under realistic combat conditions. The G11 came closest. And then, in November 1989, the Berlin Wall came down. German reunification began. The Bundeswehr suddenly had access to hundreds of thousands of AK-74 rifles from the former East German military, available essentially free. The budget crisis from absorbing East Germany made a 2.7 billion mark small arms purchase politically impossible. H&K's parent company ran into financial difficulty. The G11 program collapsed. The most technically advanced rifle in the competition, the one that had actually been certified by NATO and budgeted for production, died because of geopolitics. Not because it failed, because Germany reunified at the wrong moment for the procurement calendar. The M16 survived the ACR program without a single improvement being forced upon it. The challengers were better, or close to better. It didn't matter. A decade passed. The M16A4 arrived in the late 90s, replacing the fixed carry handle with a flat-top upper and Picatinny rail. Red dots. ACOGs. The rifle was transforming from an iron sight platform into an optics-first system. The Army was modernizing what they had rather than replacing it. Then came the most ambitious replacement concept in the rifle's history. The strategy had shifted from hit probability to technology overmatch. OICW. Objective Individual Combat Weapon. 1994 to 2004. The concept was two weapons integrated into one system. A 5.56 kinetic component, essentially a compact rifle, fused to a 20mm airburst grenade launcher. The 20mm rounds wouldn't just explode on contact. They would be programmed in flight with a laser rangefinder to detonate at a precise distance, above and behind cover. Shoot through a wall, kill the man standing behind it. The program eventually designated the combined weapon the XM29. The weapon that the program produced on paper was genuinely revolutionary. Airburst fragmentation grenades, laser range-finding, programmable fusing, technology that would eventually end up in the XM25 standalone grenade launcher a decade later and influence the XM157 fire control system being fielded right now. The weapon itself was unusable. Loaded for combat, the XM29 weighed 18+ pounds. An M4 with an M203 launcher underneath weighs roughly 11 pounds. The soldier going into a firefight with the XM29 carried 7 additional pounds in his hands before ammunition, body armor, water, or any other gear. Soldiers carrying 80+ pound combat loads in Iraq's heat were already having heat casualties. Nobody was adding 7 pounds to the rifle. And the 20mm rounds weren't lethal enough. The micro-fuse, the programmable electronics that made the airburst concept work, occupied internal volume that would otherwise have been propellant and fragment mass. The result was a round that detonated above cover with insufficient fragmentation to reliably kill the man behind it. The technology worked. The terminal effects didn't. $25 per round versus pennies for 5.56, a system that weighed 2/3 as much as an entire M249, and a lethality problem the program couldn't engineer its way around. It solved the cover problem by creating a carry problem. In 2004, the Army split the concept into separate components. The XM8 would handle the kinetic role, a new service rifle. The XM25 would become a standalone airburst launcher. Neither would survive. The OICW program spent 10 years and produced 2 follow-on programs that also failed. The technologies it developed are now fielded on other weapons. The rifle it was supposed to replace is still in service. The XM8, 2002 to 2005. The XM8 was a derivative of the HKG-36, adapted for U.S. military requirements. Lightweight polymer construction. Short-stroke gas piston instead of direct impingement, meaning the gas that cycled the action operated a piston rather than routing hot, carbon-laden gas directly into the receiver. Cleaner, cooler, potentially more reliable in sustained fire. In 2007, the Army conducted an extreme dust test comparing the XM8 against the M4 carbine, the SCAR, and the HK-416. The test protocol exposed all 4 weapons to the same standardized dust environment and measured stoppages under continuous firing. The M4 recorded 882 stoppages. The HK-416 recorded 233. The SCAR recorded 226. The XM8 recorded 127. The XM8 failed at 1/7 the rate of the M4 in that test, 7 times more reliable in dust. That was the weapon the Army canceled. The reasons were institutional rather than technical. The XM8's PCAP accessory rail system was incompatible with the millions of Picatinny standard accessories already purchased and in service. The handguard had a melting problem. the polymer softened under sustained fire, that hadn't been resolved. H&K was a German company proposing a sole source contract, which opened procurement to legal protest from Colt and FN. The Army disputed the test methodology, and as political pressure against the sole source award built up, critics argued the Army used the technical concerns as cover for a decision that was really about procurement politics. In October 2005, the XM8 program was canceled. 3 years of development. The only country that eventually adopted it was Malaysia. The pattern was now unmistakable. The best performing rifle in the dust test, the one with documented objective superiority over the weapon it was supposed to replace, got canceled because of Picatinny rail compatibility and a German sole source contract. Because at this point, the rifle wasn't competing against rifles, it was competing against an ecosystem. The M4 survived by being deeply embedded in a system of accessories, training, and supply chains that no competitor could immediately replicate. SCAR, Special Operations Combat Assault Rifle, 2004 to 2010. SOCOM, U.S. Special Operations Command, ran their own parallel procurement. They didn't want to wait for the Army's procurement process. They wanted a modern rifle now. The requirement? A modular system with interchangeable uppers for both 5.56 and 7.62 NATO. 2 rifles sharing common controls, ergonomics, and training. The Mark 16 for standard use. The Mark 17 for situations requiring more power and range. FN-1. The SCAR-L for Mark 16. The SCAR-H for Mark 17. Both used short-stroke gas piston. Both were genuinely capable weapons. SOCOM purchased 850 Mark 16s and 750 Mark 17s. In June 2010, SOCOM canceled the Mark 16. The official statement was blunt. The Mark 16 does not provide enough performance advantage over the M4 to justify limited funds. The piston system was more reliable in some conditions, but added weight and cost. The 5.56 Mark 16 wasn't dramatically better than the M4 in the roles Special Operations actually used it. The 7.62 Mark 17 filled a real capability gap. There was no free alternative for that caliber, so it stayed. The Mark 16 didn't. Special Operations Command ran their own competition, selected a winner, purchased nearly 2,000 of them, and then canceled the 5.56 version because it wasn't different enough from the thing they were trying to get away from. That is how dominant the M4's position had become. The Army watched SCAR play out and launched one more try. A conventional competition this time, open to all comers, no predetermined winner. Individual Carbine Program, 2010 to 2013. 8 companies entered: Adcor, Beretta, Colt, FN, H&K, LMT, Remington, and Troy. The requirement: beat the M4 on reliability, ergonomics, and accuracy. The bar the Army set was an improvement, not a revolution. All 8 passed Phase 1 evaluation. That was the good news. The bad news came in Phase 2. None passed Phase 2, not one. On June 13th and 14th of 2013, the Army announced the program's cancellation. No competitor met the minimum threshold on all required metrics simultaneously. Some were more reliable, some were more accurate. None hit every required benchmark at once. Here's what makes this cancellation different from all the others. The Army canceled the program and never released the detailed test data. 8 companies had spent years and tens of millions of dollars developing weapons for this competition. Soldiers were still carrying M4s that the Army itself had been trying to replace for decades. And when the whole process ended with 0 winners, the Army kept the detailed performance results out of public view. Even as the companies that had competed were left guessing how exactly they had fallen short. The stated reason was that releasing the data could reveal sensitive testing methodologies. Critics argued the real reason was that releasing the data would show exactly how marginal the differences between candidates were and force a harder conversation about why the bar was set where it was. Think about that for a moment. The Army ran the most wide-open small arms competition in decades. Every major manufacturer in the business, 3 years of testing, a requirement set by the Army itself. And when the answer came back as 0 winners, they classified the results. No explanation of what each candidate failed. No breakdown of which requirements proved hardest to meet. 8 companies, 0 winners, and a sealed envelope. When a competition produces 0 winners, hiding the data protects the process, not the soldier. The Independent Carbine program generated no new service weapon, no public data, and no accountability for how the requirements were constructed. It did generate a study that recommended the Army accelerate the M4A1 conversion program. The replacement competition concluded by recommending the Army invest more in the rifle it was trying to replace. That is the Individual Carbine program in one sentence. 60 years earlier, a Marine wrote home about finding his dead beside disassembled rifles. The Army's answer, in 2013, was to seal the test results. Between the Individual Carbine cancellation in 2013 and the launch of the next program in 2017, the Army accelerated the M4A1 conversion program. The M4A1 replaced the 3-round burst trigger group with a full auto capability, preferred by experienced shooters. It added a heavier SOCOM profile barrel that handled sustained fire without losing zero. It standardized the ambidextrous selector for both-hand operation. The conversion cost approximately $240 per rifle across roughly 500,000 weapons, a $120 million program to make the existing rifle meaningfully better. The M4 had received 92 documented improvements since entering service in 1994. Not major redesigns, specific solutions to specific problems. Better buffers, improved coatings, enhanced extractors. Each upgrade emerged from documented field failures. The platform absorbed lessons continuously, and the logistics argument grew stronger with every failed replacement. Millions of M4 and M16 pattern rifles in inventory. 30 NATO allies standardized on 5.56, billions of rounds in the supply chain. Hundreds of millions spent on SOP mod accessories, optics, suppressors, lights, lasers, all optimized for the existing platform. Any replacement weapon faced not just the engineering challenge of being better than the M4, but the economic challenge of justifying transition costs across an alliance. This is why the Army kept failing to replace it. The M4 was never the best rifle available. It was the best rifle available relative to what switching would actually cost, until the threat changed. 2017. The Army's Small Arms Ammunition Configuration Study concluded that the M855A1 round, the Army's most capable 5.56 ammunition, could not reliably penetrate Level 4 ceramic body armor at combat ranges. The Ratnik system equipping Russian infantry used Level 4 ceramic. Chinese military body armor had caught up to similar protection levels. This wasn't a marginal finding. At 600 meters, M855A1 was ineffective against the armor that near-peer adversaries were fielding. The M4's most capable ammunition had been outpaced by protection technology. Level 4 ceramic armor was rated to stop 7.62 M993 tungsten armor-piercing rounds. Some configurations, in testing, stopped 338 Lapua Magnum. The protection levels being fielded by potential adversaries had advanced beyond what any existing service caliber could reliably defeat at combat ranges. The Army launched Next Generation Squad Weapon, NGSW. The requirement was defined around defeating Level 4 protection at 500 meters and beyond. with a new caliber, new rifle, and new automatic rifle replacing both the M4 and the M249 simultaneously. The program represented the first time the Army had set a requirement that the existing platform genuinely couldn't meet. 6.8 millimeter, 80,000 psi chamber pressure, a round that carried enough energy at range to punch through ceramic. 3 companies entered, 3 very different engineering approaches, all targeting the same fundamental problem. How do you contain 80,000 psi in a shoulder-fired weapon that a soldier can carry in combat? Textron Systems brought their polymer-cased telescoped ammunition, the concept developed over decades from LSAT research. The bullet fully embedded inside the propellant block, wrapped in polymer rather than brass, lighter, more compact. The feeding geometry allowed more rounds in the same volume, but the ejection path of the large polymer cases was chaotic and unpredictable. Cases flew into the shooter's face and interfered with prone firing positions. The fire control integration required complex electronic timing systems that added weight and failure points. Textron was eliminated. General Dynamics submitted the RM277, a bullpup design using true velocity polymer-cased ammunition. The bullpup configuration maximized barrel length within a compact overall package. But with 80,000 psi, the chamber explosion in a bullpup sits directly beside the shooter's ear. Even with hearing protection, the pressure wave was a safety concern that the design couldn't fully resolve. Reload ergonomics in prone position were slow. The design couldn't feed belt ammunition. General Dynamics was eliminated. Sig Sauer won with the XM7 rifle and XM250 automatic rifle in April 2022. Their solution was the bimetallic cartridge, a stainless steel casehead bonded to a brass body. The steel handled the extreme chamber pressure without rupturing. The brass expanded normally to seal the chamber. It used conventional manufacturing techniques and a conventional machine gun action. The engineering risk was lower than either competitor's approach. The feed tray cover opened to the side instead of flipping up, a small detail that meant the optics stayed mounted and zeroed through a reload. Small in the lab, significant in the field. The contract ceiling? $4.46 billion over 10 years for weapons and ammunition. The Vortex XM157 fire control system, a digital combat optic with laser rangefinder, ballistic calculator, atmospheric sensors, and network integration, added another $2.7 billion, $10,800 per optic. Total NGSW program, over $7 billion. The XM7 has been fielding to close combat forces since 2023. The 101st Airborne was among the first units to receive it. Early field reports raised concerns the Army publicly acknowledged. Captain Braden Trent's 2024 report from troops in the 101st documented severe teething issues, barrel gouging after 2,000 rounds, suppressor locking rings failing, the XM157's digital display crashing, what troops called the red screen of death. The weapon loaded heavier than the M4, 9.84 pounds for the rifle with suppressor, growing to 13 to 15 pounds with optics, ammunition, and accessories. 20-round magazines versus the M4's 30. A standard combat load of 140 rounds versus the M4's 210. The Army's official position: these are early fielding issues. Barrel life exceeds 10,000 rounds when measured correctly. SIG introduced a lighter 7.6-pound variant to address weight concerns. The XM7 is not replacing the M4 for all troops. It's going to close combat forces specifically. Non-combat soldiers retain the M4. The weight and ammunition capacity trade-offs are deliberate, accepted costs for the penetration capability gained. The counter-narrative comes from within the Army itself. Captain Trent's report argued that fire superiority, not long-range aimed fire, is what wins most firefights. The data on actual combat engagement distances showed that most contact in recent conflicts occurred under 300 meters, where the 5.56 M855A1 was effective, and where volume of fire mattered more than armor penetration capability. The adoption of the XM7, his report argued, represented a significant downgrade in combat effectiveness for the majority of engagements, in exchange for superior performance in scenarios that may never come. This debate is unresolved, which is a different situation than every previous replacement attempt, where the debate ended in cancellation. The SIG consolidation creates a separate concern. SIG Sauer now supplies the M17 and 18 service pistols, the XM5, the commercial designation for the XM7, the XM250 automatic rifle, and the 6.8mm ammunition. A single contractor holding the contracts for the Army's service pistol, service rifle, automatic rifle, and primary ammunition. If SIG's production lines encounter problems, financial, logistical, or political, the Army's entire small arms supply chain becomes vulnerable simultaneously. This was not a consequence anyone explicitly chose. It emerged from SIG winning independent competitions on their merits. But the result is a level of single-vendor dependency that GAO has flagged as a systemic risk. So here's what 60 years of failed replacement programs actually cost. SPIW ran 23 years and produced a grenade launcher attachment. ACR ran 4 years, produced a technically certified winner, and lost to German reunification. OICW ran 10 years and produced concepts that became separate programs that also mostly failed. XM8 ran 3 years, beat the M4 in the Army's own extreme dust tests, and was ultimately canceled over Picatinny rail compatibility issues and procurement politics. SCAR ran 6 years, fielded in small numbers, and had its primary variant canceled for insufficient improvement. Individual Carbine ran 3 years, found 0 winners, and sealed the results. Each program identified a real problem. None of them solved it in a way that justified replacing what existed. The M4 survived not because it was the best rifle available. It survived because it was good enough, and because the institutional, logistical, and financial weight of 60 years of investment made any alternative almost impossible to justify. Every challenger had to be not just better, it had to be better by enough to offset the entire cost of transition. The ones that were technically superior got canceled for bureaucratic and political reasons. The ones that weren't superior enough got canceled for being insufficient. The M4 sat in the middle and outlasted all of them. The NGSW is the first program to set a requirement the M4 genuinely cannot meet. 6.8mm will penetrate what 5.56 cannot. At the performance level defined by the threat, there is no M4 upgrade path. The Army has been trying to replace the M16 since before most of its current soldiers were born. They may have finally found the reason that was always missing from every previous program. Whether the XM7 delivers on that promise, or whether it becomes another cautionary tale about trading one set of problems for another, won't be clear for years. But for the first time since 1964, the rifle in the hands of American infantry might actually change. And if the history of this program has taught anything, it's that the question was never whether the replacement was better. The question was always whether it was better enough. And that answer has been no for 60 years.